My name is Tim Deluca-Smith. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at CoSoSys. Welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're based, for joining today's security briefing. Today we'll be discussing data protection for banking and finance and looking at what's really happening at the endpoint. For those of you who haven't joined one of our security briefings before, let me just give you a very, very brief summary. These are not heavy death by PowerPoint sessions. They're designed to be interactive discussions between some thought leaders in the space, people who are dealing with some of these challenges in real time with organizations like yours, and we'll be discussing some of the hot topics facing data protection in the banking and finance section. Absolutely delighted to be joined by my guests today, Carmen Oprita, a business development manager also here at CoSoSys, and Jay Kay, a technical account director at Askaris. I'll ask them both to give a very brief introduction to themselves. Before I do that, just a bit of housekeeping. There is a Q&A function on your control panel, so please feel free to drop in a Q&A. This session runs about 30 minutes, and that gives us 10-15 minutes at the end to answer any of your questions. Don't worry about taking screenshots or making notes. A copy of this recording will be sent to everybody, hopefully within 48 hours of today's session. So let me just throw it over. Carmen, let me start with you. Perhaps you could give us a brief introduction.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm Carmen Oprita. I'm the UK sales manager at CoSoSys. I have been with the company for 12 years now, and I have been working with our channel partners and with our enterprise customers. Perfect.
And Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay. I've been here at Askaris for 4 months now. I've been working in the cybersecurity space for the last 6 or 7 years, grown from being an account manager, working with some high-level FS customers, all the way through to more of the technical side. So now I kind of advise on boards, as well as building the solutions here at Askaris.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I don't want to labor on this. I want to dive straight into the content as soon as I can. But for those of you not familiar with CoSoSys, let me just spend 20 seconds. Our Endpoint Protector solution is a data loss prevention tool designed and built to protect your data at employee endpoints. Those are the laptops, the machines, the computers that they're using on a daily basis. We work across a number of industries, finance and banking, obviously being one of them. And they all share one thing in common, right? And that's the need to protect sensitive data and control how employees are using it, whether that be customer PII, credit card information, or really any other type of confidential data. We're also really excited actually on this webinar to announce that we've just been named a data loss prevention leader by G2. That means an awful lot to myself and the rest of the team because unlike some other analyst rankings, G2 rankings are based on real 100% validated customer reviews. But let's dive into today's session, and we're going to be discussing some of the data protection pains being felt by organizations like yours in the finance and banking sector. And I wanted to start by putting the challenge into a bit of perspective, I think. This data actually comes from IBM's latest cost of a data breach report. It's something they do every year, and they look at the typical threats facing different industries and the average cost of a data breach. If you haven't seen these reports before, just do a search, cost of a data breach, IBM, fantastic reports that really delve into the challenges. I thought it was useful to share this because I don't think it's any surprise to see finance and banking here in the second spot, with an average cost of a data breach now sitting at almost $6 million. And that cost, like healthcare above it, is largely driven by the fact that companies in your sector handle huge amounts of customer PII, right? Everything from address details to social security numbers or credit card details. And in fact, the sheer volume of PII being handled across most industries is the reason why it's the single most common type of data subjected to a breach, with 44% of all breaches containing a PII loss. And And Jay, I think, when we talk about, the cost of a data breach to an organization, for me, I think it sort of comes down to three main areas, right? And I don't know whether you wanted to expand on this at all, but I think number one, and certainly pertinent to this sector, the financial penalties by a regulator that can be imposed, or a data protection regulator if it's GDPR or CCPA, for example. There's operational disruption as organizations have to put resources in to control the problem, mitigate the problem. And then finally, brand damage. I mean, how do those three sort of resonate with yourself?
Yeah, and I think one of the issues the financial sector sees, because it's so heavily regulated by so many different regulators, you're not just looking at GDPR in case it's PII. Our PII could be parts of a debit card number. It could be parts of your account number, they're still PII, but then you're looking even more so across to things like PCI DSS. So the financial sector have got it coming from all different areas. So the fines and the regulations and the resources that would be taken on board when a subsequent attack hits, or when something is leaked, is not only are they trying to contain an attack, they've then got multiple regulators, where most other businesses in most other areas don't have these same stringent controls that have security built into their audits. It just kind of ramps it up a little bit more. So it's not just, oh no, we've got to try and contain this attack. We've got to put resources to it. We've then got your legal teams are involved, your board are involved. You've then got shutdown of some systems if it is a subsequent attack. So if your CRM systems are compromised, you can say goodbye to your sales function for a time being. So there's a lot to think about when something does happen, and it's not just trying to contain it; it's what's going to happen next.
Sure. And Carmen, you're in your role, you're talking to banks, credit unions, insurance companies on a daily basis. Are they seeing this sort of threat increase? It's number two on this. I don't want to call it a leaderboard, but a leaderboard right now. Are they also sort of aware of this growing risk?
Yes, I would say they are definitely aware, and I would say so that especially in the last 2 years, where everyone had to implement a hybrid work model, and with this hybrid work model, you don't have anymore that traditional secure company network. So the security has moved on the endpoint, and this is especially important for financial organizations because of the type of data they are handling, right? It's very sensitive with PIIs, credit card information. So I would definitely say that the concern for an increased security has also increased, and especially at the endpoint level. This is what I'm seeing at the endpoint level.
And we're actually going, I think, Jay, you've got some thoughts about the whole remote work challenge. I think we're going to cover that a little bit later on. I think this is a really interesting thing to consider, though, is the obvious question is, right, where are these threats actually coming from? I think if we were to base our assumptions on what we read in the media, we would probably think that the largest threat to an organization's data right now are these malicious actors, nefarious activity being undertaken by hackers external to our organization, trying to crack through the network, trying to extract information. The reality is that's not the case. Of course, that's a threat, but more than 50% of data breaches today are being caused either by employee negligence or malicious insiders, right? And you can break those down to two. Obviously, the malicious insiders are there for some kind of financial gain, but we'll cover this a little more on the next slides. But this employee negligence, these aren't people doing anything wrong. They're just making mistakes. Right, we're talking about USBs loaded with information that have been dropped, misdirected information, the use of shadow IT, storing all of this information on their endpoint. And I think that's why this whole concept of insider threats has become so large right now. I've got a great example of one here, which is Desjardins. In Canada, Canadian credit union company, a couple of years ago, they had a breach comprising PII of almost 10 million customers, right? And this went on for 26 months. This in fact, this wasn't an innocent insider. This was malicious activity done for financial gain, but it was a rogue employee who was extracting PII data from customers who'd been purchasing Desjardins products. It costs the organization somewhere in the region of 150 million Canadian dollars to settle that. I mean, Jay, you've been in the industry for several years now. What do you see the main differences between that sort of external hacker type of threat versus these insider threats that organizations are facing?
So there's not much of a difference. At the end of the day, they both have a common goal, especially if they are malicious. The only difference is the internal's got more kind of resource behind him and a little bit more know-how and a little bit more chance to be undetected. So if you see in that 212 to 231 days difference, and that's mainly because the data isn't taken out straight away. At the end of the day, what they're doing in the first instance is they're just trying to get the lay of the land, and they're trying to figure out where they can access what they can access. They're not actually trying to get stuff out straight away because they'll bring some form of alarm onto themselves too quickly, and then they're screwed. So, and the other side of it is, and when they do get to that stage, they can start exfiltrating data. It's not a big bang approach. It's not we're going to take it all at the same time. It's a trickle effect, and they're taking little bits at a time. They're finding new ways, or they're trying different variables of, I'm going to take a little bit now, I'll take a little bit more. Let's see at what point is it going to be until I can take more and more out. Do I get detected, or am I getting the cusp of detection? And then at some point they've bitten off a bit too much. They have been detected, and that's why when they do track back, it's been 200 odd days they've been sat on the network, reconning, escalating the privileges, getting to different areas within the business, and taking somewhere down. And that's probably why it's so large, and it's tough to detect an internal person who has got the know-how, and you do have to have stringent controls in place of this whole zero trust model that a lot of companies are now taking on board to kind of reduce that fact.
Yeah, I think this surprised me actually that even just the average days to identify a breach was over 200, and that's just to identify, right? That's not to remedy the situation. That's just to identify, and as you say, it's 231 days, so a significant increase in the days to identify that malicious insider. And I think it's almost analogous to, it's not a burst water pipe, right? There's not just this sudden rush of alarm bells going off. It's that slow drip of a tap, right, that's happening. So often it's happening under the radar of any protection thresholds that may exist before any alarms are set off. Carmen, I'm gonna turn it over to you at this point, because I've put down here 3 different types of threats. I wonder if you could sort of talk through a couple of these for me. These, when we talk about insider threats, I made the point earlier that it's not all malicious people, right? It may just be people making mistakes. So I wonder whether you could talk through these and maybe, contextualize it with what really the discussions that you're having with organizations in this sector.
Yes, sure. So when I speak with the customers from the financial sector, they most often mention to me they are concerned about intentional and unintentional data loss. So the first 2 categories that we have here. So for the first one, for the unintentional data loss, where employees just make mistakes, the customers that I'm speaking with are looking for a solution that can be configured in such a way that it won't interfere with the user's work, but still provides the security that they are looking for. So here, essentially, I'm talking about granularity, because user experience is very important for the customers that I'm speaking with, because if the user can perform their job with minimal disruption, then they don't look for alternative ways of sharing or sending sensitive information. And it's also important to have ongoing security training, not just 1 training per year, as we have here on the screen, that they forget their security training. So it's important this aspect that it's not just a 1 per year training. And also companies need to communicate why security measures are important and why security software is installed and why certain policies are in place, because they are important for the company. Then for the second piece that we have here, that employees break the rules. So this is the intentional data loss. This is that employee that takes data intentionally. For these scenarios, I see that for our customers, it's important to monitor as many exit points as possible. Browsers, sharing applications, instant messaging applications, even copy-paste activities or print screen activities, and also strong reporting and alerting. I see that it's a topic that comes up in my discussions.
I think, of either of those two, those intentional versus unintentional, what do you think is driving that demand right now? Do they see them as being of equal threat, or are they more concerned with one of them?
Yeah, they are more concerned about the first one, just employees wanting to get their work done or simply being careless with their data. And then I think this, this is the top priority for them.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think on the next slide, we're going to talk about this sort of remote work challenge and how this has contributed, because, often we forget, right? These are employees that just want to get their work done, and we're giving them the tools and the collaboration tools in order to do that. Data is very fluid. It's really easy for us to share it, and we may be compromising. And talking of compromising, that is the final one, right? That employees can be compromised. While a product like Endpoint Protector is not an anti-malware or designed to sort of protect against social engineering attacks, it does in the final mile, right? Because employees can be compromised. They can receive emails supposedly from their CEO asking them to email out some confidential client records or information out to an email address. And they might think that they're doing the right thing, even if they've had their security trainings, because it's the CEO. I should do that. So it's at that point where we have to put our trust into a DLP solution to block that activity and make sure it doesn't happen regardless of the context. So we've mentioned it a couple of times, this whole piece around remote work, right, and what that's done. Jay, tell me your thoughts about how this has maybe shone a bit of a light on some of the threats.
We understand, obviously, the last 2 years has been tough for a lot of companies in terms of having to build a remote working kind of organization these days, and it has been. And one of the biggest ones is having devices that are sanctioned by IT to be able to, and have the relevant controls to be able to do their work. Some do have it, some don't. Some have mobiles given by a company, but the majority of a workforce, especially during COVID, didn't. So they're a typical iPhone. So this is my own personal iPhone. Yes, my company make me have specific controls on my work phone, my personal phone, if I'm using it as a work phone, so that I don't have a risk. But a lot of companies, because it was quicker and easier, and they had to get a workforce back to work, they didn't. So anything down to an endpoint kind of anti-malware or kind of an endpoint piece on the mobile, just making sure that when they are doing something, it's always protected, or it's consistently looking at different applications to make sure that those are okay, has been a massive task. Even down to your home network. At the end of the day, a home network is probably one of the most insecure networks known to man. Even down to your router having admin credentials, that is so basic that my children now know what how to get into Sky's admin. I had to change that 6 years ago, thankfully, because if they found out, they could have done some got rid of the cutoff point for all internet in my house, which would have been hell. But this whole BYOD devices and unsanctioned devices has been a massive pain for a lot of companies, and I think that's one thing they have to look at, is having those stringent controls, even on a BYOD device, to be able to kind of mitigate that risk. Does it conform to your works policy in terms of IT usage? And if it doesn't, don't use it.
I think, even if it's a managed device, right, I think the threat landscape has changed enormously in this remote work world. I mean, Carmen mentioned it earlier, activity that happens when the device is offline, right, behind closed doors. There's no sort of physical monitoring of what's necessarily happening, jumping between networks, but also, and I mentioned this earlier, this very quick sort of jump of organizations onto collaboration tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams. I think there was a great quote that I read shortly after, the world went into lockdown and organizations started moving to this remote sort of hybrid method of working that said, 5 years worth of digital transformation had been compressed into 2 months. Right. So very quickly, organizations and employees were getting to grips with, right, I've now got Slack, I've now got Microsoft Teams, I've got email, I've got a shared cloud drive. What can and can't I share on these tools? We had a security briefing a couple of months ago in the legal around the legal sector, and one of the guests was explaining, within their organization, they're not allowed to share details about a particular client case with other teams in that organization, but they had a massive issue with people using Microsoft Teams and Slack to share case materials where people outside of the project team still had access to it and they just couldn't control it. Right. So it's people getting to grips with this new way of working. So it's not just the, physical networks and devices, it's the apps and workflows, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think data classification, as I think is what you're kind of alluding to, has been a pain even before pre-COVID. At the end of the day, an organization doesn't want every single employee having access to every single bit of information. You wouldn't have any of your sales team looking at HR records at the end of the day. So that kind of, but at the same time, did they have the right classification?
I think we're losing you a bit there, Jay. So we'll move on. Hopefully you get your connection back. I think when you look at all this, you realize, to your point earlier, Carmen, you realize that what happens. How the hell has it been able to be sent to me in the first place? And that's, I think, being the biggest tough and a big issue moving across, which we still need to We've got a bit of lag. We've got a bit of lag on the line there, Jay. We lost you for a bit, so we'll just move on. I think when you look at this, and you said this earlier, Carmen, what happens on the endpoint really matters. And I think, the last few years has really shone a bit of a light on this, that, threats move with employees, even when they're offline. This confidential information, which is the lifeblood of organizations, it starts to flow relatively uninhibited across emails and messages and devices. So, personally, I think, if you're looking at data protection strategies that are 100% focused on where your data lives, you're probably not asking the right questions, right? I think it's about what those exit points are, right? What are those different exit points that data could potentially leak from, right? Some are very obvious, like an email attachment, right? We all just throw attachments to email without really thinking about the contents. Some are less so, right? Like dropping data into a Slack message on request, or going offline and printing confidential information at home. Carmen, there's a couple of examples on here, but I wonder if, based on this slide, if you could give us a quick rundown of probably the most common threats that you've seen in discussions with financial organizations.
Yes, sure. So these are the 4 main risk areas, and the first one I'd like to comment on are the removable devices. They are still a cause of concern for the majority of our customers. They realize that they need better control now over the peripheral devices, because an employee working from home has access to many more devices than they used to have in an office where they were supervised. So I think this is somehow the most important one. And then the second one that I'm seeing is email and messaging. Here, our customers expect features to enable them to prevent the case, for example, in which an employee sends emails with sensitive information and they are mistyping the recipient email address, for example. So they want to protect themselves against these unintentional data losses, right? How we spoke earlier. Then for uploads. As you mentioned, with the increased use of collaboration and cloud tools, it's not possible anymore to completely restrict uploads. And I think all our customers are expecting a high level of granularity with uploads of sensitive data. And then finally, for the data at rest, I have also seen that visibility over the sensitive data stored locally on the computers becomes more and more important, Of course, our customers want to reduce their risk exposure by making sure that only the employees that absolutely need to work with sensitive data like PIIs have this data on their computers. So they are looking for a tool that gives them this visibility, but also enables them to delete the sensitive data on the computers where it's not supposed to be.
I think actually when I saw this, Carmen, that actually the data at rest one was the one that resonated actually a lot with me, because I thought, actually, now that I'm working from home, I talk to a lot of people, and people get into the habit of just storing files onto their C drive, onto their desktop, either because they've got perhaps a slightly shaky internet connection, or they have to go through a VPN, connect to the cloud file store. It's just easier to make offline copies, right, and put it on their desktop. And that's what I call these, a latent threat, right? These things about content that's being removed through a USB that perhaps I drop or lose, or I misdirect an email, or I upload something to a private cloud. That's an immediate threat, right? The data's gone. This data at rest is a latent threat. It's there, it's ready to explode. And I imagine from a GDPR, a PCI DSS perspective and so forth, I imagine, Joe, I don't know whether you've got a comment on this, but there's probably a compliance piece here, right, in terms of not actually being able or allowed to store that information or process that information on an endpoint.
There is, especially with PCI. So at the end of the day, if you've got credit card details that are stored elsewhere other than in the card data environment, that is being locked down through VPN and stricter controls, it's a PCI issue. And I think you're correct that it is a latent issue, because at the end of the day, you can put in a piece now, a data classification or a DLP piece in now, and that will sort out everything that's going to be happening from point now to moving forward, and that includes any data at rest that you start to create now. The issue that is a lot of organizations are starting to have is, where's all the data from prior? Where is it all being stored? Have we got everything? And is it classified properly? Is it put in the right place properly? And I think that's where the biggest risk is it's not getting the controls in now. It's where's all our data in the first place so that we can put that in the right place.
So we've understood the challenges facing organizations in this sector, in particular the importance of being able to protect the endpoint and avoiding the operational and financial risks associated with data leaving those. But in this last sort of 5 minutes, this last section of the webinar, I wanted to look at some best practices that the folks who've joined us today can take away, right? How should DLP solutions be deployed? How should we be thinking about accelerating time to value for technologies like this? Carmen, perhaps we can kick off with you, because I know we've spoken in the past about this, and this is something I think you've got a lot to say about.
Yes, sure. So for this piece with zero tolerance for ultra restrictive and zero trust policies, what I'm seeing is that user experience is very important for our customers, and that the IT team would do almost anything not to impact the end user too much. So there are two things that come to my mind. First one is that you can't treat everyone the same and have the same rules for everybody and for all the departments. And again, I'm bringing up the granularity. This is what our customers are looking for. And the second one is that our customers are looking for frictionless ways in which the users can sense sensitive data as part of their normal work, but the administrators would still like to have the visibility over those transfers. So here I'd like to mention a popular feature that we have in Endpoint Protector called user remediation, where the users will need to acknowledge that they are about to send sensitive data, and if they still want to send it, they need to input a justification. Got it.
Perfect. Frictionless. I love that, and that's right. From the end user, the employee doesn't care about this. They just want to get their work done. Of course, they don't want to break any security rules, but still, they shouldn't have to think about it, right? So it should very much be a frictionless experience for them. Number two, we'll rattle through these, but number two, the offline challenge, right? Understanding the risk of offline work. If you're reliant completely on network tools, cloud security tools, the minute your device goes offline, that's it, right? You're losing either any visibility or you're losing any control over that endpoint. So start to think about what those potential risks would be. It could just be something as obvious as printing or trying to move content to a removable storage device. It may be something more subtle. It may be changing file names to try and hide activity, right? Changing file extensions. It could be the ingress. We often talk about the egress, the removal of information, but it could be the ingress of information, that they're bulk uploading a load of files, perhaps from a previous employer. We don't want on that endpoint. All of these activities, I think, that could happen offline. So it's really important when you're looking at your security stack to also look at that endpoint challenge and make sure that you have control, even when devices go offline. Involving business leaders. Jay, I don't know whether you can comment on this, because I think no technology is going to solve the problem overnight, right? There's also a cultural change. And I think if you don't get it right, as Carmen said, people revert to shadow IT and they find workarounds just to try and short circuit what you're trying to achieve.
No, 100%. And you're right. Security within a company is a culture change. It's a cultural shift in the fact that a lot of people, especially if you're looking at the lower level in terms of a business hierarchy, they still don't understand a lot of it, of why it's going in and what's going on, and what's being implemented for their safety as well as the business's safety at the end of the day. So that culture change needs to come from the top down, not the bottom up. Your business leaders need to be the one championing it. Your CEO, your CFO, CISOs, well, your CISOs do anyways, but that's by the by. But all those are the ones that need to be showing good practice first, so that those who are in the managerial sections also then follow the good practice because they're doing it. It's monkey see, monkey do at the end of the day. If those at the top level are still bypassing systems, if they're still doing things that they shouldn't be doing, what's good for them is also going to be good for everybody else. So it is definitely top-down approach. And if we can get a board on board and get them really looking into it properly and really start to change how they see themselves, and even down to their own personal lives. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're all big data lakes at the end of the day. So changing even down to them locking down their social media, knowing what they should and shouldn't be posting online to give them cause for issues. If they can be seen to be doing that, everyone else will start falling in line.
The next one I think we've covered a few times, but this is understanding team collaboration. It maps into what we've just said about that frictionless experience that Carmen was explaining, that people just want to get their work done, right? There is always such a balancing act between the IT, the compliance officers, the CISOs who are there to protect data, and teams that just need to get their work done. And as I said before, we've compressed all of this digital transformation into, a couple of months, and people that have never made Zoom calls and used Slack, all of a sudden it's become part of their daily workflows. And one of the impacts of that is it's increased this fluidity of data, right? It's really easy to copy and paste, to drop it into Slack and think, well, it's an internal tool, right? It's simple. But if you're not adminning those channels, if you're not aware of who the external guests are, the minute there's an external guest, perhaps you've got a compliance breach right there. So it's understanding, I think, the point of this slide is, if I've got Slack, if I've got email, if I've got Microsoft Teams, which one should I be using? Right? How does the security policy map into how organizations think about collaboration? Are there different use cases for different apps? Are there admin settings that need to apply to have guest access in Teams, or to make sure that in Slack, guests can't be part of channels? They're only one-to-one direct messages. So there are all these things, I think, that have to be spoken about. And I think it takes us into the final slide, which is this: you have to take a more holistic approach, right? I mean, Carmen, say it again. I mean, you mentioned earlier, right? Organizations rely on an annual security training and hope that's enough. I mean, is it?
It's definitely not enough. Yeah, it needs to be a continuous training. This is the actual training, but also with the help of some tools, like I mentioned earlier, our user remediation, and also just to provide some other context here in regards to the last point that we have here on the slide. Rollout changes slowly and deliberately. So what we usually recommend to our customers is somehow a three-step approach. First of all is that they roll out the solution or any solution in a phased approach, preferably by department, so they can set and refine policies specific to the work of that department. And just as important is the rollout of the solution in a monitoring mode. So in our case, we offer a DLP solution, setting the DLP policies on report only, then review the reports for 1 month or even longer. This will enable the cybersecurity team to refine the policies with the help of other departments. And finally, to keep in mind that a DLP solution is not a set and forget type of software. The IT team needs to constantly gather user feedback, adjust the policies, and train the employees.
Got it. I mean, how do you do that as a large organization? How do you start taking that feedback from employees? I mean, I guess it's looking at support tickets, user remediation requests to sort of refine whether policies are too restrictive. Would that be an example?
Yes, it's a good example.
Okay. So there we go. Start off slowly, just monitor your environment, see what's happening before you make those decisions. Don't go jumping in at the deep end and blocking all ports and blocking all activity, because you will very quickly swamp your IT support desk, I imagine. Any final comments from yourself, Jay, that you think we've missed in the conversation?
I think my main one was just on the training. It's all well and good. Yes, we need to do it more, but it's also making it more subjective to the people you're talking to. At the end of the day, sitting a load of people down and just talking to them saying security this, security that, security needs to do this, it's going to bore people to tears. They're not going to listen. So when you are doing the security training, make sure that your target audience is fit to the training that you're doing. For example, if we're training our sales guys, they're not going to sit there and listen to a load of slides. They're just going to switch off very quickly. So making it interactive, making it more into it, but at the same time, giving them the reasons why, not just telling them that they need to do it. It's why they need to do it. Show them.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the first things I think I did once to a previous company was I went onto one of their social medias and said, this is why, because you could rally off. I know you've been running on this day, you ran this kind of route, and they just went, oh, okay. And it's showing them that that's the sort of thing that these attackers are looking for to be able to compromise a business. It's the small details in a person's life. That's what it's going to get them. Phishing campaigns, they thrive off that. They thrive off knowing who you are. For example, you can put your top dollar on CEOs like in golf half the time. And I can guarantee a lot of whale phishing attacks are going to be filled with the next level golf class or something similar, so that it gets their attention. So it's trying to reduce what you're trying to do, but at the same time teaching your people you're talking to the reasons why they need to do it.
Perfect. So let's summarize. The cost of a breach is growing 10% over the last year, largely driven by financial penalties, by regulators, by operational disruption, by brand damage. We know that work from home has contributed to that. It's shone a light on some of the deficiencies in security architectures. We know that actually the principal threat is not from those nefarious outside actors. It tends to be from insiders. We use the term insider threat. It doesn't mean that all of that insider threat is malicious. Some of it is accidental. We've learned about some of those common exit points that exist, and why looking at the endpoint and making sure that endpoint protection and from a DLP perspective is really part and parcel of a mature security stack. Obviously we focused on the finance and banking perspective, but given the nature of the information they handle, and meeting PCI DSS regulations and others, but I'm sure there are people on this session from other industries, and these same points probably apply to them. So with that, I want to thank my guests, Jay and Carmen. And I think we'll leave our security briefing there. So thank you, everybody, for attending. We do have some Q&As. In particular, I think they go into quite a deep area. So what I'll do is actually we'll take those Q&As and we will respond to you directly. So thank you for those. We do have those logged. We will get back to you, and there's some comments as well about the product and our roadmap. So we'll be happy to reach out and talk to you. But aside from that, thank you very much for joining. We always appreciate you giving up sort of 30-40 minutes of your time. I hope that was useful, and we look forward to seeing you on the next security briefing. Thank you, everybody.